Hello, my name is Andrew Harris. I am a co-chair for the editorial committee here at the Canadian Science Policy Conference. We're here on day 3 of the conference, and I'm very happy to be joined by the Chief Science Officer for the Canadian Blood Services, Dr. Devine. How have you been enjoying the conference so far?
I've been enjoying it a lot. It's been a very interesting time.
Great, good to hear it. So I'm just going to start asking you questions. So my first one, as I mentioned, you're the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer for the Canadian Blood Services. You were instrumental in the development of the Canadian Blood Services Centre for Innovation, its NetCAD Blood for Research facility, and you are a founding member of the Centre for Blood Research in Vancouver, where you do your research. So apart from establishing new research programs and institutions, what are your main roles as the chief scientist, and what are some of the main challenges that you face?
So my main role is the chief scientist in the organization, which is actually a new role for me. I just started that in January. Previously, I had an administrative responsibility for all things medical and scientific at Canadian Blood Services. And then in January, I moved into a new position in the organization as a chief scientist, where my job is really to help the organization determine directionally where it's going to be going in the sort of medium and long-term future directions, to keep an eye out on the landscape for what new science is coming to bear on the blood system, and what new opportunities there are for Canada to keep its blood system safe, sufficient, and modernized.
So all the preventative measures.
Preventative measures and sort of exciting new technology, how we might someday have drones that move blood from our production facilities to the teaching hospitals in downtown Toronto, or whatever those kinds of new opportunities are.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
My next question, last year you published a paper titled Donor Deferral Policies for Men Who Have Sex with Men, Past, Present, and Future. The paper mentions that that determining the HIV prevalence of low-risk groups, such as monogamous couples, is a difficult task. So what advances in research do you think are required to address this important issue? And what is your hypothesis for what policy changes we will see in this area in the coming years?
So maybe I'll give a little bit of history so that the audience can appreciate the journey. So we had, in the mid-1980s, when it was determined that HIV could be transmitted by blood and blood products, the incidence of HIV in the population was primarily in the gay community. And so actually working with the blood operator at the time, which was not Canadian Blood Services but was Canadian Red Cross, advocates in the gay community basically said, look, we don't know what this is all about, but it's probably better if we all basically say, let's not donate blood for now. That practice got codified in the way that Health Canada allowed people to donate blood. And so we ended up with a deferral for any man who'd had sex with another man since 1977. And as time marched on, that became a lot of years. And it became a deferral that was greater than it needed to be to protect the safety of the blood supply. So in the last decade or so, Canadian Blood Services has been working hard to work toward right-sizing that deferral to the risk. And what we would ultimately like to be able to do is to have a behavior-based deferral for men who have sex with men. So if you are in that subset of sexually active gay men who are perfectly safe blood donors, we want you to come and donate, but we need to figure out how to identify those donors from donors who are engaged in risky behavior. And so that being able to do that sounds like it should be simple, but in fact, when you really try to be able to demonstrate that you can design questionnaires and design screening processes that actually work and work consistently, we don't have any data. So what's become a requirement is that in order for us to get changes to donor deferral with Health Canada, which is the ultimate decision maker on these things, we need to be able to go there with data sets that show that changes that we're requesting, we have data to show that that's a reasonable thing to ask. So to acquire these data sets, we've actually, with the support of the federal government, we received a $3 million grant from Health Canada to actually launch a research program. So we put granting opportunity together for Canadian researchers to come forward with ideas about what those data sets might look like and to go out and collect them. So we're right in the middle of that process right now, and we're just starting to get we funded 1-year and 2-year projects. And we've just got the first bit of the one-year projects are just starting to complete now. So we should be full of a lot of really interesting data within the next 18 months, and then we hope that we'll be able to see data sets that allow us to take a proposal to Health Canada to say, look, here's a way to do this, and here is evidence that says that this policy change is safe for the Canadian blood supply.
So changes are coming then? And,
we hope, we really hope.
Yeah.
So we changed from a permanent deferral to, first of all, 10 years, then 5 years, now to 12 months. We will be seeking a change to 3 months, but that's still excluding sexually active gay men who are safe donors. That hasn't really fixed the problem. And so we want to look at a behavior-based deferral system, and we need to figure out how to design it properly. That's where we are.
Because the public needs blood so badly, you don't want to exclude healthy donors.
We don't
right?
want to exclude people who are safe donors, and that's in all kinds of deferrals. So, we're always trying to right-size the risk mitigation with the risk. And so, and an example would be something like tattoos and body piercing. We used to defer donors for a year if you had your ears pierced, and now that's down to 3 months because we've recognized that 12 was too long. We generated the data to support a change to 3, and that was approved. So it's really this process of how do you match the risk mitigation to the actual risk, and you need data in the middle to understand what that risk modeling looks like.
It's such an excellent example of science-based decision-making and policy, and really appropriate for the conference.
Yeah.
So my next question, you had a talk this morning, From Crisis to Confidence, Building Science and Policy Bridges in Canada's National Blood System. Now I was in the audience, but perhaps for those people who are tuning in, you could just explain a little bit more about the challenges associated with bridging science and policy in the context of Canadian blood services. And what are some of the science policy issues that we're facing today? I know you mentioned a few of them just now.
Sure. So 20 years ago, when Canadian Blood Services was founded, it was founded in a crucible of crisis. So we had a contaminated blood supply in Canada. We had patients who had, along with their life-saving transfusion, also received HIV or hepatitis C. And when all of that was looked at, we realized that there were fundamental flaws in a number of the policies that were set in place at the time for protecting the safety of Canadians in the context of blood transfusion. When Canadian Blood Services was established, we realized very early on that it was really important to have a science arm that could go out and acquire the data that was needed to make good policy. And so the organization had established a research and development group, and it was quite small, and it could only do a limited amount of activity. So we realized that in order to actually make this whole thing work, it needed to be a partnered, networked type of an approach in the country, where we could, recognizing that the brain trust is in Canadian universities, was that we could find university partners who would basically say, yes, we recognize that to make sure Canada's blood supply is safe, we need to be engaged in research that maybe they weren't thinking about doing in the first place. And so that allowed us to build a huge network. It allowed us to train more scientists in transfusion medicine, to train specialist physicians in transfusion medicine, and to really create an awareness of the importance of this work in the science sector in the country. And so that, Canadian scientists really responded to that, and we've managed to build quite a good network, and we now have one of the safest blood supplies in the world.
And everyday Canadians, thank you for it. I'm cognizant of the time, so one final question. What do you see as the greatest value of CSPC?
So I think the greatest value of this organization is really to foster the tables for the kinds of dialogue around how do we actually do a better job of translating science into policy decisions in Canada, and how do we figure out how to make the best outcomes for the taxpayer investment in science. And it's a really terrific organization to be able to have that kind of conversation.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so is there anything you'd like to plug?
So the one thing that I would just like to let people know is that if you're interested in learning more about the blood supply, or about maybe you're thinking about being a donor, or maybe you just are a scientist who wants to learn a little more about the research activities, there's a lot of information on our website, which is www.blood.ca. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
I will. Thanks a lot.